The third nation in our short series is the Sarcophan Delves. Sarcophan is south of the empire and is the nearest of all the major foreign nations. And it's still pretty far away, but it's closer than either Sumer or the Commonwealth. Like the empire, it's benefited from a central position on the map of the known world and has trading ties with all the known nations. It's the rogue of the great nations' adventuring party. Its theme is trade. Its visual influences are hard to pin down, but are somewhere around fantasy Renaissance Venice. Its language is Dutch. Sarcophan is a world power that wields its influence through money and through being able to get its hands on things people will pay for. They tend to be fairly upfront about what they want and what they're prepared to give to get it, and they reserve most of their political manoeuvring for other Sarcophan. So this may be quite short compared to the first two. I apologise in advance also for any native Dutch speakers listening as I mangle the pronunciation of a few key Sarcophan terms I originally got from Google Translate. At the heart of the Sarcophan nation is one sprawling city, the Delves themselves. Built across the wide winding delta of the Umshala River, this tottering ramshackle city is a great metropolis, home to both the wealthiest and the poorest people in the world. It's not all there is to Sarcophan, but it's the only bit most imperial visitors bother to visit. One of the reasons it's ramshackle is it's built in and out of the ruins of at least one much older city. The Baedelar Huisbas, the Beggar Kings, own the city and by extension rule the nation. The Baedelar are the leaders of great merchant families, but those families started out as tomb robbers, entrepreneurs, thieves and bandits who parlayed the wealth stolen from hundreds of ancient tombs into grand fortunes that put the wealthiest guilds of the League to shame. A relatively young nation, the people who would become the great families of Sarcophan were basically nomadic bandits until about 400 years ago. The people of Sarcophan see wealth as the highest aspiration. They pursue profit with the same eager zeal that the empire pursues virtue. There's a saying, nobody is native to Sarcophan, which recognises that the nation is a grand melting pot of immigrants, exiles and even colonists. Some of those newcomers have managed to claw their way up the greasy pole to join the Baedelar of the older families at the Great Table, I'll get to that in a moment, where they are enthusiastically welcomed as peers and potential patsies. Disease is rampant in Sarcophan, which might go some way to explaining why they are so good with herbs and medicine. It also might explain why a significant portion of the population expresses the Draugr and Briar lineages, much more so than in the Empire. Much of Sarcophan is marshy. Indeed, large chunks of the city itself are flooded or slowly sinking into swamps. Outside the city, there are vast stretches of bogs, disease-filled forests, and lowering dark hills thick with mine workings. Anything of value that can be clawed from the country itself is funneled back to Sarcophan and then sold to the highest bidder. Or rather, usually sold to the highest bidder. The Sarcophan aren't stupid. They know the value of sometimes selling something to you today for a little less than they might get if they sold it to someone else, in the anticipation of making even more money on something they sell you tomorrow. Not everyone found in Sarcophan is technically alive. The Sarcophan don't use slaves, but they use something else. The Ongalukig, literally the unfortunate, are corpses animated through the arts of the Zealandweaver, the soul weavers. These unliving workers perform tasks too dangerous or unpleasant for human labourers. They aren't often seen outside of the nation, but it's believed that some Sarcophan vessels supplement the human oarsmen with Ongalukig rowers. Many Ongalukig are made from the corpses of the poorest Sarcophan people, who sell their bodies to the Zealandweaver before they die, either to pay off debts or to provide wealth to their loved ones, in the hope they'll be able to improve their position. It's considered shameful to be so poor that one has to sell one's dead relatives to the Zealandweaver, but is a common practice among the lowest levels of society. Other Ongalukig are made from the corpses pulled from the river and the swamps by the corpse collectors. The Zealandweaver pay a small bounty for each unclaimed corpse given over to their care. To call a living Sarcophan Ongalukig is an serious insult. It implies they are only fit for work more properly done by animated corpses. The Empire has some interest in these Ongalukig, unsurprisingly, but the Zealandweaver aren't particularly forthcoming. They have little interest in sharing their trade secrets with outsiders, perhaps unsurprisingly. I mentioned the Great Table earlier, and it's the centrepiece of Sarcophan politics. It's a literal table in the highest room of the Palace of Beggars, and it's the heart of the nation. Each of the Baedelar Huisbas has a seat at the Great Table, where the leaders of the nation come together for the tomb banquet, a phrase which has several meanings. Originally, it meant the share of the wealth of ruins and tombs claimed by the original settlers, but it's increasingly come to mean the monthly meetings of the Baedelar, which coincide with a great feast. Only the wealthiest, most cunning and most influential families get a seat at the great table, and these days it's rare for a new family to do so without taking out an old family first. The feast itself is somewhat informal, but is used to discuss trade and to decide on matters that affect the nation as a whole. The Baedelar don't make many rules. They prefer not to restrict their fellows in the pursuit of wealth, but when they do, those rules are taken very seriously. 3 of the seats at the great banquet are not held by members of the great houses. 1 seat is left empty for death. 1 is offered to the highest bidder each month at auction, and 1 is assigned by a public lottery, available to anyone with a silver coin to spend on a ticket. The tomb banquets are lavish affairs. Every great family pays a stipend which is used to secure the finest food, drink and chefs from around the globe. Cooks, serving staff and entertainers alike are paid very well indeed, and a good showing at the tomb banquet can set someone up for life. But there's another kind of fine dining that is characteristic of Sarcophan, the other kind of tomb banquet, which is the centrepiece of Sarcophan funerals. Every proper Sarcophan funeral includes ritual cannibalism. The body of the deceased is carefully prepared, with multiple dishes being created from the corpse. The funeral itself consists of a feast during which the friends and family of the deceased consume these dishes alongside the finest food and drink they can afford. During the meal, the living remember the dead person, but they also strive to take some of their strength and character into themselves by consuming their flesh. Dying in a way that does not leave a body behind, or worse, being forced to sell one's body to the soul weavers, is seen as a tragic circumstance by most Sarcophan. This is the only time the Sarcophan engage in cannibalism. To eat someone outside of a funeral, or to eat a random stranger, is as unacceptable to the Sarcophan as it is to anyone else, more or less. There's also a drug called visivles that starts out with corpses, but that's entirely different. Anyway, this doesn't prevent a certain ghoulish curiosity on behalf of other nations, but is rare for an outsider to be invited to partake in a funeral feast, and a high honour. On the whole, the Sarcophan aren't particularly spiritual, and they're cheerfully tolerant of any religions that might turn up, as long as they don't interfere with the practice of making a profit. Their own religion encourages people to make as much money as possible, to secure a comfortable future for themselves and their family, and to make sure they get a proper funeral, so they can enjoy a temporary afterlife in the houses of silence. The better someone did in life, which usually but not always means the more money they made, the longer they get to stay in the houses after their death, and the higher their status is once they get there. Once your money runs out, metaphorically, you get kicked out of the houses of silence and get reincarnated somewhere in the world to start the process all over again. The Sarcophan certainly aren't dogmatic about all of this. There's a plethora of churches and temples in the Delves, and only the most disruptive are actively discouraged. There's a number of followers of the Way in the Delves, for example, made up of Imperial and Sumar immigrants and local Sarcophan converts, and there are plenty of Sarcophan who have a lot of time for the virtues of prosperity and ambition, if perhaps not quite as much time for some of the other virtues. Sarcophan merchants have been trading with the Empire for centuries. They mostly turn up at the ports along the Bay of Katazar, unload their ships, load their hold-downs with imperial grain, wine, ore and timber, and disappear again. Unlike the Farad'n, they tend not to press too far inland. Sarcophan is a naval nation as well as a mercantile nation, and they prefer to deal with the large coastal settlements. What happens to the goods they deliver is up to the imperial merchants they sell them to. They've also made several more serious trade deals with the Empire over the years. The best known is perhaps the Steel Fist. The illium that goes to the imperial orcs is a payment from the Sarcophan Delves made each season in return for freedom from certain tariffs. More recently, individual families and guilds have made agreements with different parts of the empire. The wealthy Vandazar family, for example, provides weirwood each season to the Concordium docks in cargo, and the influential Crudenkenner Guild of herbalists and apothecaries provides herbs via their warehouses to Crown's Key in Mead and to Iversgard in Karsk. These are just the public high-profile arrangements the Sarcophan have made. They're also one of the Empire's primary trading partners, and even allowing for the preferential treatment their traders receive in return for providing the Steel Fist, they bring in a significant amount of money to the Imperial Treasury each season. Even before the Liberty Pact was first suggested, the Sarcophan were not a slave-owning nation. To some outsiders, it seems odd that a nation so ruthless in the pursuit of profit was averse to using slaves to get it, but the Sarcophan generally considered the use of slaves to be a waste of time and money. While some merchants may become involved in the slave trade, their fellow Sarcophan looked down on slavers. As one of their philosophers said, there are few jobs so dangerous, so dirty, so demeaning that someone will not do them for a silver coin, and I do not need to give anything to a labourer beyond my coin, not housing, not clothing, not food, not drink, not a funeral. When the summit to discuss opposition to slavery was first mooted, however, the Sarcophan were not particularly optimistic. In the end, they sent a delegate to the Winter Solstice meeting with the Empire, the Commonwealth, the Sumer Republic and the Citadels of Axos. They took part in the negotiations, but at the last moment declined to sign the pact themselves. Instead, the Beidlar Huisbas passed one of their rare laws and made the ownership and sale of slaves illegal, securing their status as a non-slaving nation. At the same time, by not signing the Liberty Pact, they were free to continue trading with people who were slave owners, allowing them the best of both worlds and positioning them perfectly to take advantage of the post-pact world. With the pact signed, various families and guilds from Sarcophan reached out to the Empire with proposals designed to strengthen trading ties between the two nations. These included various ways that Cruden could provide more herbs, proposals to trade white granite and weirwood to the Empire, an offer to provide large amounts of white granite to help the Senate complete its programme of fortifications, and perhaps most ambitiously, the establishment of trade enclaves in the League and Varushka that could have significant implications for the imperial economy. For the most part, the Sarcophan Delves have avoided any major scandals or frictions with the Empire. The one major bone of contention between the two nations arises from their commitment to free trade. Sarcophan merchants make no secret of the fact that they are willing to trade with the enemies of the Empire as they are with the Empire itself. It's just business, after all. In particular, Sarcophan ships are able to cross the Bay of Katazar unmolested by Grendel pirates, and during the raid on Dubtraig at the end of 382 YE, it was noted that there were several Sarcophan vessels at the docks. For their part, the Sarcophan pride themselves on their neutrality. They don't pick sides, and they have the same attitude to Grendel money as they do to imperial money, namely, that as much of it as possible should be in the pockets of people from the Sarcophan Delves. That's the Sarcophan Delves then, a nation that owes more than a little to Ankh-Morpork, to Lankhmar, and to the films of Peter Greenaway. For now at least, they stay pretty neutral in world affairs, and seem mostly interested in opportunities to make both the Empire and themselves as rich as possible. You can find further details of everything I've mentioned here on the main Empire wiki. The place to start is anything that's tagged Trade Winds, and find the section headed Sarcophan Delves. Next time, I'll be covering the Commonwealth, the most polite proponents of total world domination anyone could ever hope to meet. Until then, a Bielf Geluk.